Nestled in the village of Dwight, at the north end of our beautiful Lake of Bays, is a narrow road that is rich with nostalgia. Dwight Beach Road and Lake of Bays Lane run close to the sandy shore of the lake and to the mouth of the Oxtongue River. This particular area became attractive to tourists and soon to cottagers after Captain Marsh established his steamer service and made Dwight a port of call. It was a fun, close-knit community who developed a strong affection for the area and the people that they shared it with.
Lake of Bays Lane is the most recent name for Dwight Beach Road, which it was for years and years. All through my upbringing, it was known as Dwight Beach Road, and it extended from the very end of the road by the Oxtongue all the way up to the South Portage Road, up past the church and up the hill and all the way out.
We know from the history that the Indians went up the Oxtongue River to go hunting, and they would come back down the Oxtongue River and meet with other Indian groups here too, and they would be trading here. And it's actually made this area a preserve of archaeological interest now. They are little nuggets, or actually they're worm tubes, used maybe as a wampum, maybe as a currency for trade, we're not sure, but they're all along her beach. It's really fascinating from the historical presence of the Indians, who actually the Chippewas today still have recognition of this area as being relevant to their history.
I purchased the house in 2002, and the house, from what we understand, dates back to at least 1915 and before, probably a couple of years before that. The house was built from wood that was milled across the street at Quinn's Mill, and it was built by a local builder named Frank Kewen. We believe that the house was originally intended and was built for a person named Percy Hood, who had intended for the building to be a store. The store never really happened, and that had a lot to do with the outbreak of the First World War. There was a fire at the post office at Goldie Manor in early 1915, and for temporary purposes, this house was chosen because it had the fixtures and it had the little store set up, that they would open this as the post office from 1915 until approximately late 1916 or early 1917s.
My great-grandparents on my mother's side, the last name was Asbury, they came here in 1891, and they moved on to Oxtongue. I don't know why, whether it was because the Edmund Goldie had claimed all of the property here, but they went on to Oxtongue and settled there. In 1903, my great-grandparents came back here and bought this parcel of land from Edmund Goldie, and we have the original deed for that. They paid $25 for it, and the deed was registered in my grandmother's name, great-grandmother's name, Margaret Asbury. There were two boathouses down there, shown in the pictures in the 20s. There was a two-story boathouse that was on the shore where this smaller boathouse is now. I remember my mother saying that the boathouse that's there now sat out on a piece of dock, which was a permanent piece of dock. It was in the 40s. I have relatives around here who were children and can recall the first boathouse, the larger boathouse, burning down. So I think it was in the late 40s that it burnt down. And then the boathouse that's there now was pulled back off the dock and put there. So that that boathouse is probably, sometime 1910.
And they were all these lots here were basically sold in the 30s, 32 through to about 38. The cottages were were built slightly after that, of course, and everybody arrived here by steamship. There was no road here. The path was their way in and out of their cottage, and where people erected fences, whether they were snow fences or board fences, they put gates on the path so that everybody here could still traverse the path, and ended up there, and it became known as Lover's Lane. Edmund Goldie basically bought up Dwight Bay. He got 4 100-acre parcels, not including the parcel that we're talking about here, where Lake of Bays Lane is. And Josiah Pratt Goldie in 1888 and Pratt in 1896. But the land where we're sitting today and the land headed up the Oxtongue River. And long before there were any homes or cottages here, although Pratt did have a cabin up the hill behind us, starting, as best we know, around 1903-4-5.
My family has owned property here in Dwight. This house that I now own, actually, and the one that's next door to us, just adjacent to the public beach in Dwight. And my family purchased these properties in the early 50s. The building that is adjacent to my house here and closer to what used to be Pine Grove Inn was the original general store in the village of Dwight. By the time my family acquired these properties and moved here, the general store had closed, and there was a small ice cream parlor or restaurant that was still functioning. My parents, after a couple of years, closed the restaurant, did another small renovation, and operated 2 motel units called Dwight Beach Motel, and it was rented out for short stay or longer stay to people, tourists coming by. And I remember it was wonderful. We met people from all over.
I first came up here with my parents. I was only 6 years old. That was in 1936 when we came. And coming up here was a gravel road from Gravenhurst up. And then coming in from Huntsville, it was a little windy track, like along the side of a farmer's barn practically. And you could only go so far, and there would be a little sign, stop, and when it blow your horn. So you pulled off to the side and blew the horn in case somebody was coming the other way, and if they reciprocated, you waited till they passed.
Often the kitchens had a pantry, some had hot plates. There wasn't much because a lot of the food was taken down at one of the lodges.
We used to walk down and eat at Pine Grove. That's what most of the people did that had cottages. But if you wanted to make a sandwich or something, you had a little spot with, we had a kettle and a toaster.
The first version of Pine Grove Inn was built in 1906, and it morphed over time and got larger and larger, the main lodge, and then with a lot of accommodation buildings, significant accommodation buildings. The routine there was that all meals were taken at Pine Grove Inn. And the Burrell family had a table at Pine Grove Inn, sometimes 2 set tables. They were always in the same location every summer. We would be busy as kids doing what kids do in the summer here, and I'm talking 4, 5, 6 years old, mucking around in the sand and in the lake, and at 7 a.m. a bell would go off. One of the staff would, in their crisp whites, would stand on the front steps and ring this great big bell. You could hear it all over the lake. The Hickoks and other people across the lake could hear the Pine Grove dinner bell.
There were no services, and so we had to get rid of our garbage somehow, so we had a very big pit dug up and just every summer got rid of it. And the things that we found there mostly were a lot of Scotch bottles, black and white.
Sheila's place here is absolutely fascinating from an architectural point of view, from what Pratt built originally in the stone fireplace, which they cooked in here. You can see how high it is. They used to have had the hooks in here to hang the food over to cook it. I mean, that's fascinating. If you went down to her beach, they've got the cabanas on the beach. There's 2 cabanas, well, obviously one for male, maybe one for female. When you wouldn't change in the cottage, you would have your costume, your swimming costume, which usually was full-bodied costume in the 1920s and 30s, and you'd go down there and change, and then you'd go into the water and swim and come back, change, and then go back up to your cottage. So
yeah, an interesting story about this road and how the folks from Hamilton got here. And the Hamilton folks going back would be Colonel Hatch, the McLarens, and then there was intermarriage there. And then there were the Burrells down at Pine Grove and Norlock. And Hatch and Burrell were both on the board of the Hamilton Sanatorium, which was up on the mountain. And even when I was a kid, I remember that and it may still be there as some other institution now. And it was quite famous in the province, and it was always full of patients. But the problem with Hamilton in the summer was the steel mills and the pollution and the quality of the air, and they were aware of that way back in those days. And they had determined that they would find a summer location for patients in the Northland. But it ended up that Burrell and Hatch found Pratt, and through communication in the village, he had an interest, I'm told, in a sanatorium.
Mr. Pratt came out from England to build a san for his wife who had TB, and she ended up dying before it was built, and so he ended up by his sons came out after that, and he went back to England, and it was the son actually that I think had all the property cordoned off along here.
They went so far as to work with him and encourage him, and he actually started the construction of a sanatorium, which was, I understand, going to be done eventually in conjunction with the sanatorium on the mountain in Hamilton.
My grandfather's brother James was about 9 years older than him, and he started a boat building business, and it was a flourishing business. When I was a kid, it was called Dwight Boat Livery. I don't know if that was the name of it right from the beginning, but they built and rented boats here, canoes, cedar strip boats, cedar strip type rowboats. I've seen local pictures from the 20s of large docks out in front of our property. My mom's first cousin, that was James Asbury's son, Art Asbury, became well known in boating as a boat racer. He set a world record in the 50s in a boat called Miss Super Test at 211 miles an hour on water. And I'm not sure if that record still stands, but it stood for many, many years. I can recall some boat races here. I'm not sure what year they were. I wasn't very old, but they sponsored some boat races here in Dwight. They were very exciting.
So you would see a lot of boats go down on Saturday to go down to the regattas, the sailing regattas, and they'd tow their sailboats down, and we as kids would sit in the sailboats and they'd tow us a big one, and the adults would go racing. And
in the 80s, we were sitting on the front porch of the cottage that we used to have here, and an older gentleman came along and he said to me, is Victor Asbury here? And I said, oh no, Victor Asbury died in 1958. He said, are you related? And I said, yeah, I'm his grandson. And he said, well, I have a story for you. He said, when I was a boy, I was at Erewhon Pines in Algonquin Park, and I got hit by a launch and I was badly hurt. And he said, and your grandfather paddled me to the Huntsville Hospital. So we shared a bit of a story, and he went on his way, and after he left, I thought, my goodness, I should have asked him a dozen more questions about that trip. How interesting that would have been.
We used to go horseback riding. Pine Grove had a big yard out the back, which is now overgrown with trees. It looks like a forest, but it wasn't. It was a big field, and you came across, and she kept a barn there, and there was always horses that you could go horseback riding. They would go up into Algonquin Park, up Opegonga way, and they would fish there. They'd bring home enough fish for the whole of the hotel to eat. You could just cast your line, and if you cast just under the hull of the boat, we always got a nice bass.
Every Friday night there were dances up at what is now the Seniors Hall, up on the highway across from the current post office. And that was another drawing card. I mean, they were very well attended. There was live music, there were square dances. And it was a fun atmosphere. It was a safe place to be, and it was just good times.
It was just quite a high life. I mean, these people knew how to live, I'll tell you.